So picture this. You're sitting across from your language exchange partner at a coffee shop.
Right, the classic setup.
Yeah, exactly. And the vibe is great. They just told this really funny story. They're smiling at you, waiting for your reaction. And then, bam, you realize you didn't understand a single word of that last sentence.
Oh, the worst feeling. Complete blank.
Total blank. And panic just instantly sets in. And I have to ask, what is the very first word out of your mouth in that exact moment? Because if you are like, 99% of people, you
Right.
probably just say, pardon, or sorry, what?
Yep, the default reflex.
Right. But if you did that, well, congratulations. You just completely killed the conversation.
You really did. I mean, it is the ultimate panic button, right? It completely derails all the momentum that you've worked so hard to build up.
It totally does. And welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I know we just threw you right into the deep end there with that anxiety-inducing scenario, but that is exactly what we are tackling today.
Yeah, we're getting right to the uncomfortable stuff today.
We really are. And look, if you've been following our journey, you know this is part 4 of our 10-part series exploring the book Principles of Language Exchange.
Right, and to just sort of frame where we are in this whole process, last time in our deep dive into chapter 3, we constructed what the author calls the 50.50 system design.
Which was huge for, setting boundaries.
Exactly. We built this rigid scaffolding, right? Using strict time limits, rules for switching languages. It basically gave us this incredibly safe, predictable foundation.
Yeah, that was the safety net. But today, we are stepping right off that ledge.
No more safety net.
No more. We are diving into chapter 4, which has this brilliant title, actually. It's called Conversation Skills, Unafraid of Silence. So we are officially moving from the architecture of the exchange into the messy, totally chaotic reality of actually talking to another human being when you barely know their language.
And it is chaotic. But before we even get into the tactical techniques like why you shouldn't say pardon, we really have to fundamentally redefine what our goal even is here.
Right, because this chapter totally challenges a deeply held assumption. I mean, most of us walk into a language exchange aiming for, flawless fluency.
Oh, totally. We want to sound smart. We want to sound like a native speaker. But the book argues that if that is your goal, you have already lost.
Because you're holding yourself to this impossible robotic standard. I mean, the mission isn't to be a perfect walking dictionary, right?
Precisely. The mission is to build the foundational stamina to connect with the world using imperfect words.
Imperfect words. I love that.
Yeah, because true fluency, especially when you're at the beginner or intermediate levels, it is not the absence of errors. It is this gritty, messy, relentless will to communicate. It's all about completely eradicating the fear of silence and just, pushing through that awkward discomfort.
Okay, let's unpack this by going back to that coffee shop scenario we started with.
Okay, let's do it.
So I'm panicked. I missed the punchline. Why saying a pardon? Or could you repeat that? Such a cardinal sin here. Because if I don't say that, am I just supposed to sit there nodding and smiling like a fool, pretending I understood?
Well, no, because nodding and smiling is equally destructive. I mean, the truth always comes out eventually, right? And then the trust is just broken.
Right, they realize you haven't been listening for the last 5 minutes.
Exactly. But the reason the book issues this absolute ban on the word pardon comes down to cognitive load.
Cognitive load.
Yeah, so when you just say, what? Or pardon, you are stripping away all the context. You're basically throwing up a brick wall and forcing your partner to do all the detective work to diagnose your failure.
Oh, I see. I'm essentially making my problem their problem. I'm asking them to guess, did I miss a noun? Was their accent too thick? Did they just speak too fast?
Right, it is a totally passive request. You're putting all the work on them. So instead of dumping the cognitive load on your partner, the book demands that you have the courage to disclose your imperfections specifically.
Disclose it specifically. Okay, how does that sound in practice?
You have to pinpoint the breakdown. So you say something like, I followed you right up until you mentioned the train station, but I completely lost the verb after that.
Okay, yeah.
Or maybe you say, was that a new idiom you just used, or did you just speak too fast for me?
Honestly, I know our listeners are probably cringing right now just thinking about doing that because it feels incredibly exposed.
Oh, it really does.
You are essentially shining a massive spotlight on your exact weakness in real time.
It requires deep vulnerability, no question. But, and here's the psychological mechanism at play here, that specific vulnerability is actually what builds profound trust.
Wait, really? By pointing out that I didn't understand?
Yes, because when you tell your partner exactly where you got lost, you are proving to them that you were actively listening. You're saying to them, your words matter so much to me that I really want to understand them precisely.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that totally shifts the dynamic from like a failed exam to a collaborative puzzle.
Exactly. It changes everything.
It's like saying, I'm in this with you. I just tripped on that last step. That is a completely different energy than a defensive sort of deer in the headlights, pardon.
Night and day difference.
But let's flip the script for a second, because that's what happens when they are talking. What about the terrifying moment when you are the one talking? Like you are halfway through a sentence feeling good, and your brain just deletes a noun?
Ah, yes. The disappearing vocabulary trick.
Right, the word for refrigerator or stapler is just gone. And I feel like the modern reflex for everyone is to instantly grab our smartphones. We just pull up a translation app.
We do. The author actually refers to this as the danger of the dictionary.
The danger of the dictionary, I like that.
It's so true, though. I mean, think about the physical reality of what happens when you reach for that phone. You immediately break eye contact, the blue light hits your face, your posture closes off. You literally leave the shared reality of the conversation and enter this solitary screen. And the heat of the connection just instantly dissipates into the room.
It's awful. You're just sitting there watching someone furiously type with their thumbs, just waiting.
Exactly. So to combat this, the book introduces a really strict 10-second rule.
10 seconds.
10 seconds. You have exactly 10 seconds to search your brain or your app for a word. If you can't find it in that tiny window, you must drop the phone and figure it out another way.
You know, when I read this part of the source material, I actually had to laugh because I was thinking, wait, so is treating a conversation like a frantic game of charades actually considered peak language learning?
I mean, I know it sounds chaotic, but neurologically speaking,
Yes.
it is peak language learning.
Why? How so?
Because when you let an app solve the problem for you, your brain doesn't have to do any of the heavy lifting. You don't build a new neural pathway. You're just outsourcing your memory to your phone.
Oh.
But when you drop the phone, you are forced to use what the author calls paraphrasing magic.
Paraphrasing magic. Okay, I love a good magic trick. How does that actually work when my brain is completely frozen and panicking?
Well, it requires a cognitive shift. See, beginners treat language like a jigsaw puzzle, where only one specific correct noun is ever going to fit the whole.
Right, if I don't have the exact word for stapler, I can't finish the sentence.
Exactly. But paraphrasing magic shifts your focus from memorizing nouns to describing functions. The formula the book provides is wonderfully simple. It's category plus function plus feature.
Category, function, feature. Okay, let's test this in real time. Say I'm telling a story about my office, and the word stapler just will not materialize in my brain. What do I do?
Okay, so under the old paradigm, you panic, grab your phone, and kill the vibe. But using paraphrasing magic, you apply the formula. First, category. What is it? Well, it's a small machine.
Okay, small machine.
Next, function. What does it do? It puts papers together.
Right.
Finally, feature. What makes it distinct? It uses metal. So instead of freezing, you look right at your partner, you maintain eye contact, and you say, I need this small machine to put papers together with metal.
And literally any human being on the planet is going to instantly know you mean a stapler.
Exactly. And what's crucial here is your partner's reaction. Because they will inevitably smile, their eyes will light up, and they'll say, oh, a stapler.
It becomes a game.
It does.
Yeah.
And notice what just happened. You didn't break the conversational flow. You successfully communicated your thought, and your partner just handed you the vocabulary word in this highly memorable, emotionally engaging, and supportive context.
Wow, yeah. I bet you wire that word into your brain far more effectively than just reading it off a screen.
Oh, 100 times more effectively.
Because of the struggle. The friction itself is what makes the memory stick. It really is like inviting them to play a quick game of catchphrase with you.
Exactly. It's collaborative.
But, okay, this brings up a massive wall that I think every single adult learner hits. Because paraphrasing magic works great for physical objects, right? A stapler, a blender, a car. But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when your brain is just way too big for your vocabulary?
Ah, yes. The agonizing gap between adult intellect and beginner vocabulary.
It is the source of so much intense frustration. I mean, you've got this 30, 40, or 50-year-old brain. You have these complex, nuanced, philosophical thoughts about politics, economics, human nature.
Right.
But the tools you actually possess in your target language belong to a toddler. You want to discuss, the socioeconomic impacts of remote work, but all you can confidently construct is, I like my house.
It's humbling.
It's so humbling, and that friction is what makes people just freeze entirely and stay silent.
It is, and the author identifies the root cause of this freeze perfectly. It's our ego.
Yeah.
As adults, we wear this, what they call an armor of pride.
An armor of pride.
Yeah. We want our language exchange partners to know that we are smart, sophisticated professionals. We fear that if we use simple words, they will actually think we are simple-minded.
Which, to be fair, is a completely rational fear. Nobody wants to sound foolish or uneducated. So we just sit there in silence, furiously trying to mentally translate this graduate-level thesis before we even open our mouths.
Exactly. And the book's solution to this is a concept termed intellectual infantilization.
Intellectual infantilization, which I have to say sounds incredibly insulting on the surface.
It does.
Yeah.
But it is actually a profound strategy.
Yeah.
Because to truly communicate, you have to intentionally strip off that armor of pride. You must have the courage to sound like a child.
Okay, but how do we actually do that without losing the depth of what we want to say? I don't want to just talk about my favorite colors all day.
You do it by enforcing really strict linguistic discipline. You have to break down your complex, abstract logic into short, punchy SVO sentences.
So subject, verb, object.
Exactly. Subject, verb, object. You strip away all the jargon, the subordinate clauses, those flowery adjectives, and you distill your thought down to its absolute barest essence.
The book actually provides an incredible example of this that really blew my mind when I read the source text. So imagine you are trying to express this really sophisticated thought to your partner. I fear the utilitarian trends of modern society.
Right, a classic adult sentence,
Yeah.
full of abstraction.
Exactly. So you try to translate that and you immediately realize you don't know the words for utilitarian trends or modern society. So you just lock up silence.
But if we apply intellectual infantilization, we stop trying to translate the jargon and we look at the core meaning. We ask, what are you actually trying to say about the world? And you break it down into SVO. The result is people only care about useful things. That scares me.
Wow, people only care about useful things. That scares me. Just let that sit for a second. It actually hits way harder than the original sentence.
It really does. And if we dig into the psychology of why it hits harder, it's because that childlike simplicity actually strips away our evasion.
Evasion.
Yeah, because when we use complex academic terms like utilitarian, we're often using language as a shield, right? We distance ourselves from the raw emotion of the topic.
Oh, that is such a good point. You can totally hide behind a word like utilitarian. It sounds objective and safe, but you cannot hide behind that scares me.
Exactly. You are forcing yourself to confront the raw philosophical truth of your own thought, and that raw honesty that fosters immediate, profound resonance with your partner.
They don't hear a toddler at all.
Not at all. They hear someone sharing a very real, very human fear without any pretense whatsoever. It's a level of authenticity that we honestly rarely achieve, even in our native languages, precisely because we are so used to hiding behind our sophisticated vocabularies.
Man, this is a huge paradigm shift. I mean, we're throwing away the dictionary, to paraphrase with staplers, and we're stripping off our adult pride to speak in these raw, simple truths.
A lot of unlearning.
It really is. But here's a practical question. If we are using these short, punchy SVO sentences, how do we avoid turning the conversation into a boring interrogation? Like, do you like movies? Yes. Do you like food? Yes.
The dreaded yes-no trap.
It's so real.
It is. Beginners gravitate toward closed questions because they are safe. You know exactly what the answer will be. But as you noted, they are a total dead end. 10 questions lead to 10 one-word answers, and then boom, you're back to agonizing silence.
So if my vocabulary is limited to these basic sentences, how exactly do we take a totally mundane topic, like the weather, and make it deep without sounding completely unnatural?
You have to deliberately shift the focus from objective facts to subjective emotions. The author emphasizes the strategic use of why and how questions. You basically abandon closed questions entirely.
Okay, let's roleplay this really quickly. It's raining outside. My beginner instinct is to point out the window and ask, do you like the rain?
Right, which gets a yes or a no. End of conversation.
So what's the alternative?
Instead, you ask a how question. How does the rain make you feel? Or maybe a why question. Why do some people love the rain, but others hate it?
Wait, if I ask a fellow beginner, how does the rain make you feel? Oh, aren't they going to struggle to answer that? That requires a lot of emotional vocabulary.
And that is exactly where the genius of the system comes in. To facilitate this without overwhelming your partner, The book introduces the answer and ask baton pass.
The answer and ask baton pass.
Right. The rule's simple. Never just ask a naked question and never just give a naked answer.
How does the baton pass work in practice? Like, give me an example. Say my partner asks me the most basic Monday morning question ever. Did you have a good weekend?
Okay, so the robotic naked response is, yes, I went hiking.
Boring.
Exactly. But the baton pass response is, I went hiking. Being in the quiet woods really helped me forget about the stress of my job for a few hours. How do you usually clear your head when you feel stressed?
I see the mechanism there. You took a mundane objective fact, a hike, revealed a little piece of your inner world, the work stress, and then pivoted that exact emotion into a how question for them.
Exactly. And if we look at the social psychology behind this, the reason it works so well is the norm of reciprocity.
Meaning they feel obligated to share back?
Basically. Showing your own vulnerability acts as a psychological permission slip for your partner. By admitting you were stressed, you signal to them that this conversation is a safe space to talk about real feelings, not just surface-level pleasantries.
You're moving from a data exchange, like, what did you do on Saturday, to a shared human experience. How do we cope with the pressures of life? And you did it using really basic beginner-level vocabulary.
You did, but, and this is a big but, you have to be prepared for what happens next.
Oh, what happens next?
When you ask someone, how do you clear your head? They aren't going to have a canned textbook response ready to go. They are going to pause. They are going to look away. They are going to desperately search for the words that will be silence.
And based on everything we've talked about today, that silence is no longer something to be terrified of.
Far from it. The author beautifully describes this moment as the fermentation time of the conversation.
The fermentation time, I love that metaphor so much.
Isn't it great? We usually view silence as a void, as a failure of the exchange.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, that silence is where the meaning is actually brewing. It is the literal sound of someone digging deep into their mind, navigating two different languages, to offer you a piece of their authentic self.
Wow.
And if you jump in to fill that silence because you're uncomfortable, you rob them of the opportunity to connect.
That is incredibly profound. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, the next time you sit down for a language exchange? If we zoom out, Chapter 4 is fundamentally asking us to redefine fluency. If you've been beating yourself up because you stumble, because you need 10 seconds of agonizing silence to think, or because you had to describe a stapler as a metal paper machine.
Which is totally fine, by the way.
Exactly, let yourself on.
Because you aren't failing. You are actually doing the real gritty work of communication.
Yes. True fluency is not a smooth, uninterrupted stream of perfect grammar. I mean, that is what an AI chatbot does. Human fluency is the messy, beautiful will to connect. It is looking someone in the eye, stripping away your adult pride, embracing the awkward silence, and just trying anyway. That effort itself is the fluency.
It is a radical shift in mindset, honestly. And once you have established that raw will to communicate, once you have banished the fear of silence and the obsession with perfection, you are finally ready to start refining your skills, which perfectly sets up our next deep dive.
Ooh, yes. We've built the courage to make glorious, messy mistakes, so what comes next?
Well, next time we are stepping into Chapter 5, which tackles correction and feedback techniques.
Okay, getting into the weeds.
Exactly. Because once you are speaking fearlessly, you do eventually want to improve, right?
Yeah.
So we will explore the mechanics of how to actually polish each other's words. And most importantly, we'll discuss how to navigate the incredibly delicate balance of correcting someone's grammar without breaking that fragile bond of trust you've just built.
Oh, that's huge.
It's the ultimate tightrope walk between the flow of connection and the accuracy of language.
I really cannot wait for that one. Knowing how to correct someone without making them feel stupid is an absolute master skill. But before we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final thought to sort of mull over on your own.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much energy trying to hide our flaws, right? We feel this intense shame when we stumble, or when we can't find a basic word, or when we sound like a child trying to express a really complex thought. But consider the possibility that the very moments you felt the most embarrassed, the most clumsy, the most exposed in a foreign language, those were actually the exact moments your partner felt the deepest human connection to you.
That's beautiful. Perfection creates distance. Imperfection is an invitation.
An invitation to connect. I love that.
Yeah.
So embrace the messiness. Refuse the silence of perfectionism. Get out there and make some mistakes today. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.